Sean is passionate about the capital markets and brings a colorful background to the profession. He has interned at Global Securities in Vancouver and a fixed income sales and trading desk at Morgan Stanley in Hong Kong. Sean has sat on the boards of the University of British Columbia Finance Club and was the director of the Canadian National Investment Bank and Conference and Competition. Now, please welcome Sean Boney.
So, sustainability, social responsibility, diversity, they're great sounding words. They make you feel good when you say them. But what do they really mean? And if you really think about it, they're almost absence of meaning without further definition. So as we heard in our first presentation, sustainable investing essentially adds another metric to investing. You have your financial metric, which is always a big part of investing, and then you have this social component, right? Which can be called social responsibility, can be called sustainability. So let's, I thought for my talk I'd delve into those a little bit and share some of my thoughts on sustainable investing and provide you with what I think some advice I'd like to hear in first, second, third, fourth year and about to enter the job market. So starting off, the first component of sustainable investing, the financial component, that's pretty easy, right? You have this impartial judge, the market, which basically says who did better than anyone else. And the nice thing about it is totally impartial. It doesn't care if you're black, white, tall, woman, man, doesn't matter. If you can earn a better return than someone else, you will have funds allocated to you. You will win, quote unquote. Sustainability and social responsibility is much, much more complex. When I think of it, I think of the active word being social. So essentially what we're talking about when we talk about sustainable or socially responsible investing is investing that relates to how humans interact with one another and how humans interact with their environment. So starting off with how humans interact with one another, this is something that I think a lot of people discount or simplify, especially in the world of finance. They look at something and say, okay, let's look at a tobacco company. Right off the bat, that's socially irresponsible, right? I think most people would agree with that. I would contend that it's not that clear-cut, right? The fact is that some people derive pleasure from things that we may not agree with, whether it's drug use or tobacco use or anything along those lines. And so if there's externalities, I think it gets quite easy. Someone's smoking indoors and it's polluting the indoors and hurting people around, I'm sure that's fair enough. But if someone actually decides that they want to take some sort of drug or do something with their own bodies, I think it takes a very sort of arrogant worldview to then say, no, we want to tell you what you should and shouldn't do. And the fact is, life isn't about living as long as you can possibly live, right? It's about enjoying yourself while you're here. I'd much rather live a somewhat shorter life and a more exciting life than a long, boring life. And I think most of you would agree with that. So I'm not here to defend tobacco companies, but I'm just saying is that when you're looking at companies, especially not with my company's logo on this, I'm just saying is that it's not that clear cut. Another example is a pipeline company. People look at a pipeline company and say, automatically it's a bad investment. Not responsible. There's a bank where I'm from, Van City, removed Enbridge from their social responsible investments because it's a pipeline company. Well, it's really not that simple because, yeah, it'd be great if we had wind power and solar power at the point where we could use it as our only electrical source or source of power, but we're not there. And so what happens when you don't build pipelines, more stuff goes by rail. That's why when you look at CP or other railway stocks, they're going through the roof because they're producing all this oil locally now because of shale gas and these other sorts of changes in the marketplace. And we have to get that to market somehow. And so if you're not going to build the pipelines, which is more efficient, it is more environmentally friendly, it goes on rail cars, right? So what I'm trying to say is you have to think kind of a few iterations deeper. Now, has anyone here traveled to a third world country, maybe by show of hands? So we've got a few people. Okay. I've been to a few third world countries myself. I attended exchange in Singapore and Hong Kong, and I was there for about a year and a half. And I think by going to a third world country, you also start to understand that it really isn't that simple about solving problems, whether you're investing in one company or another, or just putting up schools. These are very, very complex problems, right? And it's something that I think social responsible investing can address, but I think you have to think a little deeper about it. I remember being in Cambodia. Cambodia has NGOs, non-government organizations, everywhere. All over Cambodia there's NGOs. I went on a tour with a guy who grew up there, had to flee during the Pol Pot regime, and then came back, and his father died, and then there's that story. But I asked him, what do you think of all these NGOs? What do you think of the work they're doing here? And he told me, he said, I wish they'd build more factories here. which, you know, if you go then talk to someone who's building or talk to a socially responsible mutual fund or ETF and told them that, hey, what do you think about investing in this factory or this company that's building factories in Cambodia, paying below market wages or unfair wages? They'd say, well, that's not socially responsible. But you have someone here on the ground in Cambodia saying, build this factory. Think a little deeper. It's not as easy as just kind of these nice sounding words and taking everything at face value. Another thing you realize, I think, by traveling to a third world country, and when you're thinking about social responsibility, you think about investing in sustainability, is you start to realize that it's not really about why some people are rich. It's not really about why some people are poor. Because poor is the default of humanity. We were all poor at one point. Right? The question is, how did some societies and cultures go from being poor to rich while others haven't? So going back to a third world country that's emerging now, China. When do you think China overtook sub-Saharan Africa in per capita income? Does anyone have foster a guess? Which one? Well, you're not. Besides the professor. Anyone have a guess in terms of when China would have overtaken sub-Saharan Africa? So everything sub of the Sahara Africa. So it does include South Africa, but it also has all those other countries. Zach, I'm going to call on you. What's your guess?
Good question. Sometime after the year 2000.
No, it was pretty close. The one I looked up on Google Public Data last night. It was 1994. So it's kind of interesting to think about that. Up until 1994, China, this country we've been reading all about, actually had lower per capita output than sub-Saharan Africa, right? So it just kind of gives you an idea. And then you look at them now; they're 6 times what sub-Saharan Africa has. So you can see this. The real question is, how did they become so successful while sub-Saharan Africa hasn't become that successful? Right? And so I think that's kind of the perspective to look at it. So moving on to the environmental component of investing, I think it's kind of interesting because sustainable investing is really inherent in the word sustainable. It's keeping the environment as it is now, or even better, how it was before. Right? Before we had more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, these sorts of things. And Mother Nature itself isn't sustainable. That's not how Mother Nature works. If you look at all the species that have ever existed on the planet, 99.9% are now extinct, right? So, inherent within Mother Nature is there's nothing sustainable about it. It is constantly changing. And it's the same with capitalism. So, if you think about the Dow Jones Industrial Index, it was founded in 1886. How many of the 12 original companies do you think are still in that index that sustain themselves over this past 150 or so years? Let's see what else presented. Besides the judges, there's 12 original. Let's see, where's Anna? She did, there you go, Anna. Just a name that came to mind. How many of those companies of the original 12 do you think are still in the Dow Jones Industrial? That's a decent guess. Jamie, how many are still in it?
One.
And actually, you got this right. She's a science undergrad, so something to think about. But it's 1. And does anyone care to guess what company it is? Third, I think you might have heard it. Oh, close. General Electric. Yeah, so kind of interesting to think about. So nature itself isn't sustainable. Capitalism, the companies within capitalism, they all die, or they seem to all invariably die or get merged, or they all eventually go into decline, right? So there's nothing really sustainable about our economy. There's nothing really sustainable about nature. So the interesting thing, what I find about the sustainable portion, I'm not saying that it's not something we should strive for. I mean, I love the idea of more greenery, things being cleaner, that's fantastic. The interesting thing is that we're actually talking about is going against nature. That's really what we're talking about. We need to get living standards to a point where we can kind of control our environment and say, okay, all the species and things that are here now, we want them to stay here, as they are right now. And so how are we going to kind of go against the natural process of things evolving, maturing, and dying, including ourselves, keep in mind, right? We might not be here forever. So it's kind of, how do we get our living standards to the point where we can control our environment around us and have it exactly how we like it, with trees and animals and plants and all these beautiful things that we all love. So, the other, kind of wrapping this all together, what I'm not saying here is that there isn't answers to these questions. That's not what I'm saying. I think there are answers to these questions. What I'm saying is the answers aren't simple. They're not about buzzwords, and you have to think a few iterations out. And you also have to be realistic about what we can accomplish today and what we can accomplish in the future. So sure, we all want solar power, we all want wind power. Can we get there now? Probably not. Can we get there in the future? Absolutely. Can our investing, can sustainable investing and investing in companies that are going that way, like Canadian Solar and other companies like that, can that get us there? I think absolutely it can. But when you're thinking of this and when you're coming into the capital markets, I think it's important to remember that things are much more complex than they appear on the surface. You do have to think about second and third order events, and you can't be taken away by buzzwords. And I'll leave with a quote from Bono that I really like. He was up speaking at Georgetown University, and he mentioned that aid is just a stopgap, like charitable giving, aid is just a stopgap. Capitalism is the only thing that can eradicate poverty. And as a capitalist and someone who works in the capital markets, I obviously really like this. But I think this also presents a great opportunity to you guys coming into the capital markets. The fact is, you're coming into an industry and coming into a profession that allocates capital and has the potential to raise the living standards of people all around the world, if it's done correctly and done smartly. Value investing, all these sorts of things. And so, I encourage you to pursue a career in finance and care about the world around you. I think that's fantastic. Recognize how complex it is, and also recognize the opportunity you have going into this profession, how you can, in fact, lead to a more sustainable, better world, more socially responsible, all these great things. And I've included my information on the next slide here. So if you have any questions or anything like that, I've got my email address, my Twitter, my LinkedIn, feel free to add me on. My girlfriend Jamie prepared all these slides, so it's quite sharp. Thanks, Dave. And yeah, thank you for having us here. I know AJ and Ara really enjoyed the presentation.